On October 4th, the EU officially approved tariffs against Chinese electric cars. Only 5 countries voted against them: Slovenia, Malta, Slovakia, Hungary, and Germany. Really, Germany? If Hungary is the guy on your team, you should know you've completely lost the plot. Honestly, that's seeming more and more likely. It seems like Scholz would have done anything he could to prevent these tariffs. The guy even went as far as to have the CEOs of German car makers call European government officials, and when that didn't work, to pressuring von der Leyen personally. And really, he should have known better. I'm sure he remembers the last time a German chancellor chose to ignore Europe, the EU Commission, and the US. That would have been Merkel, who, against everyone's advice, rewarded Russia's occupation of Crimea with Nord Stream 2. And now, there's a full-scale invasion in Europe. So why is Scholz so determined to repeat Merkel's mistakes? Firstly, he's incredibly unpopular, and there's an election next year, so it's not looking too great for him. I mean, 77% of Germans find him a weak leader who can't get his way, and who can blame them? Scholz's coalition government is an absolute disaster, and nobody in it seems to know how to solve Germany's 12 million euro deficit, which he's publicly fighting with his finance minister about. With all of that mess, if China was to retaliate towards German industry, that might be the nail in the coffin for his chances in the ballot box. Secondly, German industry has been in shambles. Manufacturing in particular has been in recession since the loss of cheap Russian fuel 2 years ago. Volkswagen and Intel are considering following a host of other German countries that are already moving production outside of the country, not to mention the decline of consumer optimism. But would preventing these tariffs really have been the best choice for Germany? Or, like Nord Stream 2, was it just another short-sighted solution for a long-term problem? Let's face reality here. German carmakers are already facing declining demand from China, their largest trade partner. And trade with China comes with severe drawbacks that would never happen with another democracy. There's lack of reciprocity, unequal competitive conditions, and crucially, technology loss. Germany should already know this, seeing as it's allowed China to take over some of the country's most innovative companies again and again. Let's wind back the clock to May 2015, when China's State Council unveiled Xi Jinping's flagship project Made in China 2025. Spanning a decade, the project marked a pivot in state-directed manufacturing towards what the CCP regarded as 10 key sectors, including electric vehicles and robotics. In August that same year, Chinese Midea Group would acquire a 5.6% stake in KUKA, a German company and global leader in intelligent robotics. This wasn't new for China. In 2016 alone, Chinese purchases of German firms were collectively worth 11.3 billion euros. That same year, a Chinese state-owned company would acquire Crossmafe from Onex Corp for 925 million. The Made in China 2025 initiative explicitly promoted leapfrogging into emerging technologies, and where better for the world's factory to acquire such expertise than the world's workbench. That initial stake in KUKA had flown under the radar, but by January 2017, Midea had acquired a total of 95% of the company. At the time, this was by far the largest takeover of its kind, but it wouldn't be the last. Takeovers of Biotest and ISTA soon followed. And from 2014 to 2017, 64% of the German companies sold to China were a part of the 10 sectors identified by Made in China 2025. Finally, in 2019, the EU Commission launched an EU-wide FDI screening mechanism which made takeovers much more transparent and restricted capital from third-party countries. And in 2022, the German Federal Ministry of Economics, for the first time, stepped in, stopping the takeover of the manufacturer of respiratory equipment, Haier Medical. The problem is, even if these reforms had been in place all along, it's questionable whether or not they would have even been able to prevent the KUKA takeover. After all, KUKA doesn't produce any goods that would endanger public order or security, which are the terms that Germany's AWV requires for an intervention. After all this, you'd think that Germany would understand better than most the dangers of unrestricted trade with China. So why has Scholz been China's strongest and sometimes only advocate in this whole EV debacle? First with Russia, now with China, why does Germany keep making these same mistakes? Germany's a liberal democracy with liberal values. It believes in human rights, free markets. China does not, so why does Germany keep treating it like it does? It's because for the past 70 years, Germany's policy towards authoritarian countries has been Wandel durch Handel, or change through trade. Germany has believed that gradual exposure to its liberal system will eventually cause countries like China to liberalize. This is a trap the United States has also fallen into before, which I criticized in my last video as well. Liberal democracies are so confident in the power of their own system, are so convinced that liberal values are universal, that they expect that if they apply their values universally, for example, by opening German markets to any interested country, that these countries will eventually recognize the superiority of the liberal system and gradually adapt. This is not only a very comfortable view for a liberal country, but it's been more than well received by private industries. After all, why would private companies turn down more trade? So when Russia occupied Crimea, Wandel der Handel, Nord Stream 2 on the way. It was only the invasion of Ukraine that finally shattered this delusion of change through trade. What Ukraine taught German politicians, it seemed like every other day there was a new apology from someone for having practiced and preached Wandel der Handel, is that authoritarian countries were never engaging in good faith. Russia wasn't being nice to you because it was suddenly realizing the merits of your system. Russia was being nice to you because Putin had caught on to the fact that he could get anything he wanted as long as he pretended to be interested in the Wandel der Handel charade. But when it comes to China, it seems like Germany has been unwilling to let go of the fantasy of change by trade completely. The idea of imposing electric car tariffs on a free market still seems unthinkable. The problem with all of this is that free markets should be a two-way street, and what's actually happened has been changed by trade. But Germany's approach of change through trade did not lead China to become a market economy. Instead, China's system of state capitalism began to challenge liberal markets in Germany and the EU. I'm sure Germans know more than most what the idea of the paradox of tolerance is. It's usually talked about in terms of free speech, and it goes something like this. Say we believe in freedom of speech, so we have a town hall and we allow everyone who wants to speak. This is all going fine until there's someone who decides to speak about how, actually, half the people in this town hall shouldn't be able to participate, let's say because they're late all the time. Then this person wins because there's a lot of people who regularly show up that don't like the people who are late. And all of a sudden, our little free speech community has eliminated free speech, all because of one guy who spoke freely about how much he thought some people shouldn't have it. This is the paradox of tolerance. For our community to maintain free speech, we need to exclude the people who don't believe in it. At the core of this problem is that free speech is a liberal value. Our system can only run on liberal values as long as everyone interacts with it in good faith. Germany knows this, which is why it has some strict regulations on speech. What Germany needs to put together is that this applies to all liberal norms, not just speech. Looking at the way China has played the German free market to its own advantage, this is abundantly clear. China takes advantage of liberal market economies in three main ways. First, it will create unequal competition that starts at home and expands abroad. China is not a free market economy. Since Made in China's 2025's launch in 2015, its government has invested incredible amounts of money into Chinese homegrown industries, such as electric vehicles. This investment and subsidization, in addition to the lack of a profit incentive for Chinese state-owned companies, has meant that they can sell products domestically for extremely low prices. Remember the German car makers who wanted so desperately to prevent these electric vehicle tariffs for fear of retaliation from China? Their sales in China have been on the decline for years because they simply can't compete with the kinds of advantages that CCP lavishes on China's domestic firms. This competition is unequal from the jump, and it eventually trickles out into foreign markets. This brings us to the second point, which is that China will demand equal inclusion into foreign markets, while it would never allow equal inclusion into its own markets. Remember KUKA and the other list of acquisitions China has made of German companies? China wants to be able to acquire foreign companies in the free market, but it would never allow foreign firms to acquire Chinese companies the same way. Out of all the largest Chinese acquisitions in the EU from 2000 to 2017, 3/4 of the deals could not have happened the other way around because of Chinese restrictions and controls. In China, this lack of reciprocity is not even a debate, and any country that thinks China's mind can be changed on this is deluding itself. Thirdly, once China has access to these companies, technology loss follows. China has notoriously lax enforcement of international intellectual property, but this is the least of companies' concerns with doing business in China. For decades, foreign firms have traded their technology and expertise as a condition for gaining access to the Chinese market. The resulting technology loss has only built the competitiveness of Chinese firms that these same foreign firms now have to contend with in their backyards today. And Chinese investments abroad are not the same as the investments of other countries abroad. China steers clear pretty much of greenfield investments, which are job generating and generate tax revenue, in favor of acquisition after acquisition after acquisition in, again, key technology sectors, which could never have happened the other way around. There is a path forward. The EU has dealt with this kind of behavior from China before. In 2012 and 2013, De Gucht, then the EU trade chief, pushed for anti-dumping measures for Chinese solar. At the time, China played divide and conquer, turning EU states against each other, and it worked. China effectively killed the measures, and in the years that followed, we saw it destroy Europe's budding solar industry. When von der Leyen announced her intent for the electric vehicle tariffs in this last year's State of the Union, she made it clear that we have not forgotten how China's unfair trade practices affected our solar industry, and that Europe is open for competition, not for a race to the bottom. Sure enough, China tried the same tactic again, but Europe learned and it didn't work a second time. Sure, she blackmailed Spain into abstaining on the EU vote, but threatening French exports didn't work with Macron, and I never thought I'd be giving credit to Meloni for anything, but when Wang Wentao knocked on her door, Italy held firm. As Joseph Borrell advised, the Commission has learned to speak the language of power with China. It's only Germany that's lagging behind. The instruments we have as free societies and open markets are not made for dealing with China. It's not going to go smoothly if we completely rely on public debate and the tools of the market. There's another half of the toolbox that we haven't used. We need to toughen up and learn to be more punitive. What German industries need to survive isn't Scholz's desperate pandering to China to delay the inevitable. What the country needs is a tough leader who isn't afraid to align with the EU Commission to speak the language of power to China.